and local business professionals. The series showcases the combined expertise of our best faculty and seasoned and knowledgeable practitioners from the business community in which we engage. The goal of the series is to help small businesses achieve success in a challenging and dynamic business environment. Before we start the event today, I would like to introduce Avi Mukherjee, Dean of the Lewis College of Business, Brad D. Smith Schools of Business, who will say a few words about our college and its mission.
Thank you, Dr. Langton, and welcome everyone to this exciting event. We appreciate your interest in the HEART 2020 Insights Small Business Webinar Series. The mission of the Lewis College of Business and its Brad D. Smith Schools of Business is to promote economic development in the regional community and beyond. We do this by implementing our strategic priorities for external engagement and economic development, including lifelong learning programs, the Business Leadership Symposium, the Dean's Distinguished Speaker Series, and the CEO panel that many of you have attended. The college has several outreach centers, including the Center for Entrepreneurship and Business Innovation, or the I-Center, that helps small businesses innovate with a focus on design thinking techniques, the Transformative Sales and Service Excellence Center that imparts state-of-the-art sales training and education, and the BB&T Center for Leadership that promotes consulting and research projects between students and the community. The college also cooperates with the Brad D. Smith Business Incubator to help promote entrepreneurship throughout the region. As the nation and the state start rebuilding businesses and economies coming out of the pandemic closures and lockdown, the Lewis College of Business is committed to supporting our local businesses, alumni, and other stakeholders in re-engaging, recharging, and redesigning their business models. Hence, we have developed this webinar series that will consist of thought-provoking presentations throughout the academic year and into the summer, approximately every 2 weeks. We hope that you enjoy today's webinar and take something out of it to use in your business or professional activities to make West Virginia and the surrounding area a better place for business and community engagement. Dr. Nancy Langton will now introduce today's speakers.
Thanks, Avi. Today's informative and engaging presentation is titled Heard Sight, Eyes on Employment of Individuals Who Are Blind. It is brought to you by Dr. Ralph McKinney, who will act as moderator of a panel of individuals who are blind. Ralph is an associate professor of management here at Marshall. His expertise is in accessibility awareness, and he is the director of the college's Center for Executive Education and Certification. Our guests include Jeff Bosley, chairman of the board Sound Good LLC, Anthony Candela, outreach coordinator for Bookreach, Benetech, and Randy Gilkey, singer, songwriter, and multi-instrumentalist. The panel will discuss what it's like to be an individual who is blind, both personally and professionally. Please feel free to ask questions via the chat function throughout the presentation. Ralph and the panel will answer these questions at the end. I now turn it over to our presenter.
Thank you, Dean Langton, and thank you, Dean Mukherjee. The theme for our program today is Vision, Life, and Work. We're joined by 3 individuals that will share their stories and experiences with us. Before we hear from Tony, Jeff, and Randy, let me share some information. In keeping with our theme, let's take a look at vision. The terms blindness and low vision refer to visual impairments that impact an individual's daily activities. While some of these impairments may be improved by glasses or surgeries, some corrections may not be possible. In fact, each individual experiences vision differently and may utilize different tools and technologies to assist in daily activities and work functions. For example, an individual may use Braille, raised dots that represent letters, a white cane that can help identify objects while traveling, service dogs to help navigate streets and help perform tasks, accessible technology such as screen readers, and assist in reading written material. Okay, in considering how many individuals vision impacts life, the American Foundation for the Blind reports that in 2019, approximately 68,981 individuals within West Virginia have a prevalence of vision difficulties. Now let's break this down. 3.5% were under the age of 18, 45% were over the age of 65, and 51.3% were between the ages of 18 and 65. This age group of 18 to 65 also represents individuals that are expected to be involved in some work related activity. Work related activity could be furthering education at universities, learning trades from vocational education programs, especially early on. Okay. This brings us back to work. Most of us are social creatures by nature, and we enjoy working alongside people in inclusive, diverse environments that challenge us to solve problems. Whether those problems are simple or complex problems, whether those problems are customer driven or driven by society, those work problems help us socially identify ourselves as individuals. It helps define us. That is, work can actually provide meaning, engagement, and self-actualization in our lives. For some, work is taken for granted. For others that are blind or visually impaired, it is a challenge. Unemployment is high, and many job seekers face obstacles in obtaining employment. Obstacles from stereotypes about inabilities to complete tasks to beliefs that reasonable accommodations are too costly. This is not the case. And each of our guests will share their story in overcoming the barriers. And we're going to start with Tony Candela. Now, as Nancy noted, Tony Candela is a program assistant with the American Foundation of the Blind. He is the founding director of the Department of Veterans Affairs Blind Rehabilitation Center in Long Beach, California. He's also has a number of years in public service, including a district manager for the New York State Commission for the Blind. Now, what's interesting is he's a retired athlete, a wrestler, and a long distance runner. He loves movies, sports, reading, writing, and music. I understand he dabbles a little bit in guitar, and he's also a publisher of some books. So welcome, Tony. Great to have you on this program with us. Can you tell us a little bit about your visual impairment, and was it like this, and was it always like this?
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you to everyone. I have in the past had low vision, and now for the last 20 years, I have been totally blind. I'm age 67, and I was born partially sighted. I could see only straight ahead, a condition that is caused by the degeneration of my retina, which is the back part of the eye. And I grew up being able to see using magnification and extra lighting, and had just enough eyesight to get myself in trouble. I did sports as a kid, not all of them very well. And then as time went on, my vision started getting worse and worse. When I was in my mid-30s, I learned how to read Braille. And then by my late 40s, I really couldn't use my eyes anymore to see anything meaningful. And I, at that point, functioned and continue to function as someone without any eyesight at all. So I know Braille, I use a cane, I use talking devices, and I think I can anticipate Ralph's next question. So that's my eyesight.
Thanks, Tony, for that. How has your vision really impacted the way that you live? And you've given us a little bit of discussion about you used to participate in sports, maybe not as great as you would have liked. I was in the same boat. I did some sports when I was younger, not so much later. And how has your vision impacted the way in which you live?
Well, I would try to do things that everybody else was trying to do. And because I had poor eyesight, sometimes I wouldn't see well enough to get it exactly right. So I struck out more playing softball than I ever hit the ball. Always the last person to be picked for the team. I might bump into things while walking because back in the younger days, I did not use a cane. I had to be very careful going into dark places because if I went from the bright lights to the dark place, I couldn't see. And when coming out into the bright light, the glare would bother me. Wore sunglasses and a cap with a bill pulled down low to give me the best chance at seeing. And then when I became older and lost my sight completely, it actually in certain ways got harder because not being able to see is a difficult way to go, but it became easier because I didn't have to struggle with eyesight that really was not serving me well. So today and other times in my life, I live alone. I use my Braille skills to label things. I was taught by special teachers how to do things like cooking and cleaning and clothing management, things that you do for everyday living. And then, of course, the more sophisticated technologies that we use for work have helped me in my professional life.
Okay, sounds great. Now, how has this actually challenged you in obtaining employment? And because looking at your resume, you've got, you know, a phenomenal service record with public service, and it looks like administration and advocacy. And you know, how has this really impacted your work life?
The hardest thing for most of us is getting our first job because we are unproven, and they know that we have a disability. Most of us disclose, especially if we are totally blind, we disclose. And the employer has a right to know if you have a disability that will require reasonable accommodations. So this goes way back. So you have your most difficulty in the early part of your career due to the fact that employers are kind of afraid to hire you. Once you start building a track record, it gets easier because then you can piggyback from your last job to your next job. It never goes away. Having a vision impairment or being blind is always something that will make people a little leery to hire you. They do worry about whether you can actually do the job, and they do worry about whether you are going to cost them extra money for the reasonable accommodations, most of which are not expensive at all, really. And I would say my vision impairment affected my career in that I picked a career that I could do with a vision impairment. So my choice of work to do, first of all, I had the choice because I was going to college and then eventually graduate school. So my choice was based on the fact that I wanted to pick something I could do with a vision impairment, or if I were to turn blind, which I eventually did. I could have chosen careers that I would have been just as happy in. I would have loved to have been an engineer, for example. I would have loved to have been a professional athlete, for example, but those things seemed kind of out of reach and unrealistic. So my career choice was affected by my vision impairment too.
Okay, and I can understand that. I know that sometimes when I was looking at career choices, for me, some of the jobs and tasks that I wanted to do, with some of issues that I had, I just couldn't do art or some of the other things that I really wanted to get engaged in. And, you know, for me, that was a little bit tough. So I chose a field that I wanted to help people, and that's why I got into the HR business, so to speak. Jeff, I'm going to be talking to you here momentarily. I'd like to thank you very much, Tony, for sharing that with us. I'm sure that we'll have some questions for you here as well. Jeff Bosley, he actually started his career in radio broadcasting in 1975. He was working with Molly O'Day and Lynn Davis before he became a sound recorder. Jeff's company has over 40 years of experience in music production. Recently, Jeff was a member of Mountain Stage Production for 10 years and has produced recordings for Marshall University College of Arts and Media for the past 18 years. Jeff, welcome. It's great to have you here with us today. Can you tell us a little bit and share with us about your visual impairment?
Sure. First off, thanks a lot for having this. This is very important that folks get this idea. I think that something I should point out quickly is that a lot of people in the general population experience visual handicaps, especially as the baby boomers age. So I think it's important for employers to realize this, and I think that we can be an important asset to help them prepare for that. As for my personal situation, I was born extremely nearsighted. I have a syndrome called Marfan syndrome. It's us tall, skinny people like Abraham Lincoln and so on, predisposes us towards myopia, and then what's called retinal detachments. So I did pretty good. I had to wear the Coke bottle bottom glasses, got my first pair in second grade when I learned that trees had leaves, which kind of affected my schooling. Had to retreat within my head because when you can't see what's on the board, it's a little tougher for folks. But I did very well in my basic early career. I ended up doing sales and marketing, being a partner in an electronics distributorship. I've always been involved in audio and recording. And so that kind of helped me with sales and marketing tasks. Unfortunately, I suffered through a series of traumatic episodes, retinal detachments in both eyes. So basically what ended up happening when I was about 30 years old is I've ended up with zero vision other than I can detect, a bright light with my left eye, and my right eye is 2200 with a kind of restricted field of vision. So basically I'm the classic guy. I'm blind in one eye and can't see out of the other. But what happened once I lost the opportunity to get out and move in a vehicle, sales and marketing required that. This company we had, I had offices in Pittsburgh, offices in New York, offices in Cincinnati, and it would require me often to go and do sales trainings and things like that. Once my vision became so poor, that was cut off. And so I actually took a couple of years off trying to figure things out. About in the mid 90s, what happened was we saw audio recording move into the computer age. And so I started re-entering that area because it became possible to actually set up a good studio and produce excellent quality material much more inexpensively and also very accessibly because you have a large computer monitor that you can bring everything up on. So that's basically how I moved into it, into this employment area based on my visual handicap.
Okay. So let's stick with the employment, and what are the barriers that you also faced? Were you trying to, I know that you've got your own company, but were you trying to seek jobs with other people? How were employers? How do you get customers? Share us a little bit with us on that.
Well, the initial problem and the continuing issue is transportation. It's very difficult. My wife has a career as well. I've been married a little over 20 years now, and my wife has a career as well as a speech therapist. And so it makes it difficult scheduling and so on. Transportation is the big issue. That is really the basic thing I've had to overcome. A lot of little things I can do. We talk, as I mentioned before, the large computer monitor is a wonderful thing. I also get a lot of help out of a simple little pocket magnifier, just a little handheld lens. Bosch & Lomb makes one. It's interesting to watch because a lot of times when I'm looking at the computer screen, I will get within 2 or 3 inches of the screen to use the pocket magnifier. And, that initially appears strange to some folks, but it works great for me. And I'm extremely fortunate in that I do have 2200 in that one eye that really helps me overcome some things that, if they were both out, it'd be much more difficult. As a matter of fact, both Randy and Anthony are my heroes because what they've accomplished with their even greater deficit is quite the thing.
Okay. Well, I can definitely see that, from your resume, like you said, you're very successful as well. The Mountain Stage production, could you tell us a little bit about that? I know that Marshall's having a Mountain Stage event 4 days from now, and you were with this production crew for 10 years. Can you tell us and share us a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. First off, I have to express my gratitude to the other members of the Mountain Stage crew who are very, very accommodating. A lot of what I did with Mountain Stage was actually production work on the stage, and it required several different techniques. One of the techniques that I utilize quite a bit and helped me with Mountain Stage, helps me with everyday living, is to build a 3D model in my head. One of the things about Mountain Stage is every production is different. We set up the stage, we have 5 different bands. So everyone is different. The band can have anywhere from, say, one person up to 20 people on stage. There's gear in different locations. So what I would do was we built the stage during rehearsals and so on. I basically would memorize where everything was and build a 3D model in my head. Just before the show starts, I do a walkthrough, look and see where everything is. And then as the show moves forward, I pilot my way through a 3D model that's in my head and use what little visual clues I can get. I was amazingly successful. And one of the, I spent 10 years there, but one of the major reasons I left was not so much that it was too difficult, it's that I'm 62, I got a little older, and the production schedule is a little tougher. But like I say, a lot of it was due to the other members of the crew realizing what deficits I had and allowing me to do the tasks that I was excellent at while letting other people do the things that required the more vision.
And I think that's really important when you're talking about team dynamics is when you're forming a team, you have diversity, you have different skills, you have different strengths and weaknesses, and teams should play to those different strengths and understand that, some people may not be able to accomplish certain tasks or even have certain knowledge if you're talking about programming or computer operations or anything like that. The team itself needs to compensate and be better as a group, and that really is the essence of a team is having that kind of shared relationships and understanding. And I think that makes really for an effective and efficient team, having those relationships. And it's great that you had that. I know with Mountain Stage, the changes and the transitions from one to another are really fast and really quick between acts. So that's amazing that you were able to accomplish those.
Well, it's just a matter of what I like to call it, and I like to focus on positive emotions. And the team requires one of the most important positive emotions, and that's camaraderie, where folks work together for a common goal. And that's something that you'll find in the music business quite often. A production crew or a band or a record label or any of these are really basically teams that rely on this camaraderie to work together. And the whole idea is that you don't have just an area of duties. The idea is that whatever needs done, you do. And, and Randy will bear this out probably too, the classic, the show must go on, and the idea is that when you have anywhere from 50 to thousands of people waiting on the show, failure is not an option. You've got to have a show. So everyone works together. And I think that really helps disabled folks. If you can get into a team that evidences camaraderie and has built the idea of esprit de corps, the spirit of the group, then you're going to succeed. The team is going to succeed. And that's what really counts.
And I think that's a great lesson in really building effective teams and having support of management and supervisors and senior executives is the fact that they've got to build these positive environments that really foster this inclusive environment. And I think that's really important. Jeff, anything else you want to add and share with us?
Well, yes, we were talking just a moment ago. You brought out the fact of the new technology and how the pandemic has changed things. And really, it has done a little bit of what I would call leveling the field in many ways. We're all now sitting at home working to a great extent. It may be a while before we get together. Now, while I do a lot of live sound, I have a small sound company and do outdoor concerts and things like that. That business went to zero last year. Now we're starting to see resurgence of that. I have several different things scheduled, for the upcoming summer and fall season. But I've had to focus more on my work doing mixing and mastering CDs and so on. I've had to focus more on archiving old material for folks, digital restoration of, say older tapes, older projects and things like that. But that may change in the future. But I can say that over the past year, we have seen we've seen a lot of folks have to work with what seem to be limitations. But the fact is, I think we've all seen that there are a lot of advantages to meetings like this over Zoom, a lot of advantages to being working at home like this. I think a lot of the corporations have realized that if your employee is working at home, you no longer have to maintain that office space at $200 a square foot. You don't have to maintain the utilities. You're not buying them a desk. Often, like myself and Randy, we have our own computers and so on because of the technology, adaptive technology we need. So for corporations, folks working at home is actually a whole lot better system in many ways than requiring everyone to show up. So I think that as we move forward, this is going to be a change that will become more permanent and a more integral part of business.
I think you're right, because when you look at the future workforce and you're thinking about what I looked at is in terms of the locality effect. In some cases, employers will hire individuals that are locally and within a geographic area. Which makes sense when you have the physical locations and the physical buildings, and they don't necessarily consider people moving in or relocating. So that is, in itself is another issue. But like you said, with the remote work, it's changed the nature of the center is of the business operation is on the mission, is on the goals, is on the product and service, not necessarily central to that building, but central to that core mission and objectives. And I think that's going to change in the future, because I think businesses and other individuals are more likely to integrate remote working locations and teleworkers into their business plans and business operations.
Well, that's right. And I think it opens up a lot of business opportunities. One of the things that I'm going to be doing at all my live events now, because Zoom and Facebook Live have really advanced over the past year and folks are much more used to it. A lot of my concerts, I'll be offering live streaming as a option for increased fee, of course, to my clients, so that I can, put their show up on, Facebook Live or Zoom or whatever. And it really kind of opens up the options to get their event or their presentation out to a lot of other folks. So that's an important thing that I'm integrating into our services now.
That sounds exciting. So even your business operations, you've changed your model and how you do business. And really, it sounds like you're getting a lot more I guess, targeted customers and market reach. So that sounds very good. Okay, Jeff, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to move to Randy now to have a little bit of a discussion with him. Now, Randy is a musician from West Virginia. As Nancy noted, he's a singer, a songwriter, multi-instrumental producer, and record engineer. He started playing the piano at age two. He tours, records, and performs with a band called the Boatmen. He can be found on albums and artists such as the Drifters, Maurice Williams, and the Zodiacs. He's played on stage with artists such as Chuck Berry and David Holt, and has appeared again on NPR's Mountain Stage several times. So Randy, again, welcome to our program. I'd like to thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing with us today. Can you tell us a little bit about your visual impairment, Randy?
Good morning, everyone. I would like to tell you, yes, I'm completely blind, and I've been blind since birth, and my blindness is due to what's called retinal fibroplasia. I think that's an old term for it. There's a different, newer term now, which I'm not sure of. But I was born premature at birth, and my retinas are both detached. And so I have light perception in my left eye, and that's it.
Okay. And how has this vision impacted the way in which you live?
Well, I have to depend on that light perception a lot to see doorways and, where things are. And, as Jeff said a little bit ago, transportation is a barrier at times, because there's times you need to go somewhere and there's no one to take you there. So
Yeah. I can understand that. And with, in some cases, we don't necessarily have the public transportation as most major cities, such as the buses, the rail services, uh, the distance between the cities. Um, has Uber actually helped with some of the transportation gaps within West Virginia?
I'm not really sure. I know I'm in Oak Hill, West Virginia here, and we don't have Ubers here in Oak Hill, West Virginia.
Oh, okay.
I
Okay.
know they have them in Beckley, I believe. And
Okay.
they might have them in Fayetteville also, but I've never used one. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Um, so again, I think that you're right, and I've heard that from a lot of other individuals with disabilities is the transportation's one of the biggest barriers that they have in getting employment and really sustaining that employment over a long period of time, and just looking at healthcare and getting that to and from appointments, just basic items such as that. I'd like to move a little bit about your work. And like we noted, you've got a lot of in the music business again, very much like Jeff. And how has your vision actually impacted the way that you accomplish tasks and employment?
Well, as far as studio work goes, I prefer to work in my own studio because I can use my computer with the speech and my screen reader. I use Windows to record with, and I use a recording program called Reaper, and I use the screen reader called NVDA, and it speaks what Reaper is doing on the screen. And in using these technologies, I have access to the keyboard instruments I want. When I'm at my studio, I have my own drum kit and guitar amps, all the stuff I use to record with. And so, when you're at someone else's studio, you're on their clock. And sometimes that's a disadvantage to me, and if I'm doing a session for someone else with technology the way it is now, I can do it at my studio and send it to them with Dropbox and stuff.
Okay. Okay. So really, technology is giving you greater opportunities to be more productive and really do what you love.
It really has, yes. Um, it's enabled me to have a career for 32 years. And I come
Now,
at this from a musician first, but I've gotten into the engineering thing in the last 10, 15 years.
okay.
And I can, I can produce and master and mix an album completely by myself using the screen reader technology and stuff. It is time consuming, but it can be done.
Now, I noted that in watching some of the videos that you've got posted on YouTube, you did a lot of performances. Are you looking forward to getting back and doing some tours with your band?
I really am. In the Boatmen, we currently aren't playing anymore, so I'm working on sort of doing some solo stuff. And then I also play with a group from Charleston, West Virginia, the Carpenter Ants. I play with them sometimes.
Hmm.
And I also play in a band from Huntington, West Virginia called the MFB. It's a funk group. And we're getting ready to get back out onto touring and stuff. And it's just, this year without music and without performing is really, it really makes you realize why you do what you do,
Hmm. Because I will say that any type of work that we do, it's really, really important that we're engaged and we're passionate about it. And I can definitely see when you're playing, just with some of the videos, just the energy that you put off with those performances, and the just the passion that you have for the music. It's magnificent. Um, and when you were getting involved in the music business, when you were starting your career, what are the barriers that you faced early on? Were there any stereotypes associated with being blind that you had to overcome?
Not too much. No, not really. When I was starting out, my dad was helping me a lot. And he always made sure that I didn't have to deal with any of those kind of things. Now, in the studio business, I have had to deal with people thinking that I wouldn't be able to produce things or work the computer to make the album happen or whatever, but I always have been able to do it.
Okay. So your father was really influential in helping you start, and you had that support system, um, that positive support system to move you forward.
Yes, and I think one of the biggest barriers now that I deal with as far as music and in the gear to make music with is the inaccessibility of like the screens on the gear. You know,
Okay. So that's one area that can be improved upon, right?
exactly. And then there's some software that won't work with the screen reader, like my audio interface that I use in the studio. It won't work with a screen reader. So I have to have someone sighted come in and help me set everything up the way I like it. And then, you know, and every time I need to make a change, I have to have, you know, my wife come and help me or someone come and help me with it.
Okay. So in looking at this, even the technology sometimes needs to be, I guess, consistent and considerate of other technologies that you use. Sometimes I know with proprietary software that they don't like to use competitors, or there's just it doesn't keep up, right?
And I think in the industry, I think these manufacturers of the equipment, I think they just don't know that there might be blind folks using their gear, completely blind folks. And I think there needs to be a way to make these manufacturers and these people that produce gear more aware of, hey, there's 10,000 blind folks out here that play. Well, there's more than that, you know. I'm just giving a proprietary number. But there's a lot of blind recording professionals that could surely, you know, benefit from accessibility.
And I think you're right on that. I think that one of the areas that we forget is the fact that blind people are also customers and consumers, and they require products and services. They have lives, they have passions, they have loves, you know, and really, when you think about, and I'm going to say this, within the United States, there's about 25% of the population that has a disability, and it's much more in West Virginia. And this represents a huge number of potential consumers, and we're kind of ignoring that group. And the question is, and I think you've alluded to that, is why is that group not necessarily be considered for some of the products and services? And it may be a design issue where the companies, as you noted, really don't understand the needs of individuals, as people experience disabilities differently, and people experience, from our stories, blindness and visual impairments differently. I think it's important that those individuals be included in product development, so that those functions that we need to be successful at are incorporated within those designs. Is that kind of your impression, Randy?
It really is. And I've tried to start a consortium of blind people a couple times to talk to these companies, but I can't really get too many people interested in it. But I think if there was I think there's power in numbers. And I think if we get together and would, write some of these companies and let them know that we're using their technologies and could use them more if these things were implemented more accessibly.
Well, even at that, I'm looking at the potential market opportunities for businesses to improve their products and services. And as I mentioned earlier, in another life, I was a procurement officer, and I wasn't purchasing for accessibility. I didn't really understand what accessibility was. This is over 20 years ago. Okay.
And there's a lot that's really changed in 20 years.
There is a lot that's really changing. And so the rules actually prevented me from getting some of the better stuff. And I had to wait for the state contracts to expire so that I could acquire items that would make PDFs and scanned PDFs, which are not accessible documents, simply because you can't use a screen reader to read those PDFs. because they're not accessible documents.
They are actually accessible now.
Now, right. Yeah, but 20 years ago, not necessarily. And I think what's really important is you've just illustrated that technology does change, and having those really helps us work. And if you think about storing electronic documents, it's really phenomenal because it removes them from the file cabinets. It allows people to have access for that information. And then I think about how we share music now. You've got, I remember my first 8-track, which was Pink Floyd The Wall, which is several years ago, right? For those that don't remember what an 8-track was, it was a pretty big piece of music that essentially had was almost the size of an index card that like a cassette tape, and cassette tapes have transitioned to CDs. Now it's digital downloads, and just the way that you noted that you can share files via Dropbox and produce. And I think that's phenomenal, the way technology has evolved. It's always fascinated me.
I'm on a web service called AirGigs, and AirGigs is a thing that musicians from around the world can hire other musicians from around the world to play on their projects. And so I did a thing last year for some folks in New Zealand, and there was another one that I did also, but I can't remember where they were from, but it was really across the world, So this technology, it just really has opened up so many avenues.
That sounds great. Randy, I'd like to thank you for your story. I'd like to take a few minutes to just to reflect on our experiences today. Despite the barriers, each of our guests has been able to accomplish success through their perseverance. Our general message is, while vision can limit some tasks and some life activities, some forms of employment should not have barriers. If an individual can function at home, they can certainly function in the workplace. The use of technology can create accessible working environments, either at the offices or at remote locations that bring individuals together. We need to create accessible working spaces. That should be the rule and not the exception. When we build sidewalks, we have these curb cuts that provide sloped paths that make it easier for wheelchairs to utilize crosswalks. Additionally, other individuals actually take advantage of this. It's an ease of use for, say, shopping carts or moving heavy objects, or not having to step that height of the curb. The inclusion of the curb cut has really become business as usual. And this is why it's important to share these stories. We want accessibility in the workplace to be integrated in the routine operations and functions of businesses. Now, people generally have a desire to engage in work and contribute to society. In the United States, as I've noted, approximately 25% of the population has a disability. In Appalachia, that's a slightly higher number at a 27 or 28%. And this includes blind and visually impaired individuals as part of the population. It includes people with mobility impairments, cognitive issues, emotional disabilities such as PTSD, metabolic disorders such as diabetes, and there's many more that are included within this rate. This is why it's essential that accessibility is part of the design in the workplace. Now, we'll go back to our curb cut example. Designing environments that allow individuals to work according to their abilities, and this is the key, according to their abilities, is essential. In fact, the costs associated with accessibility are not astronomical. Jeff mentioned that he works at home. Randy works at home, and they prefer to use their equipment. They've got this just illustrates the fact that it's not as expensive. A reasonable accommodation can be made by discussing the work and what tools the individual needs to be productive and successful. And I think that's what we want with all the workers that we have in our organizations, is to provide them tools to be successful. And we need to create that diverse and inclusive environment, which is really essential to that creativity and innovation within our organization. Now, we noted that this 25% of the population that has disabilities, those also represent consumers. And if we include those individuals with disabilities in organizations, they can help contribute to solve issues on a more holistic approach because they're represented, because you're representing the entire demographics of the community. And they can provide information and thoughts that maybe other people have neglected or because of stereotypes and biases. Now, we've got some resources on disabilities in the workplace. They're available to organizations and individuals. For example, the Americans with Disabilities Act is found at the ada.gov. The Job Accommodations Network, or JAN, is located at askjan.org, askjan.org. And the American Foundation for the Blind is located at afb.org. And just to note, this is their 100th year, so you definitely want to check their website out. They've got upcoming events, they've got videos, and just if you want to get involved or share information, go to their website. And finally, MU Access, which is accessibility, curricula collaboration, fostering employment student skills, is a Marshall University group that's an accessible group that helps develop future managers and employees that have accessibility awareness, knowledge, and skills that can help create inclusive environments for the workplace. And they can be found at marshall.edu/mu-access. And we've got a flyer that we can send to our viewers a little later. I think it's important that, when we're creating these spaces, that we're mindful of being inclusive and creating those positive environments. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dean Langton and see if we have any questions from our viewers. Dean Langton.
Thanks, Ralph, and Tony, Jeff, and Randy for an enthusiastic, informative, and insightful presentation today. It will help us all think more about employing individuals who are blind. I'll now read some of the questions that were posted during the event and some that arrived by email before the event. And we do have a lot of questions in the chat function. Let me get that back up. Okay, the first question says for Jeff, but anyone else also who would like to answer. It says, it seems that you have had a remarkable team to work with, but for other teams, what is your advice for guiding and mentoring a team that may not have the experience in working with individuals with limited or no vision? So I guess it's asking about being on the other side, advice for the other people.
Well, thanks for the question. I think that what's important is that everyone get together on the same page. The most important thing is that we all understand that the goal is a successful collaboration versus a competition. That's really what you want to foster, I think, is a collaborative atmosphere. And, it's okay to have frank discussions. What are your abilities? There's nothing wrong. I mean, as a disabled person, it doesn't bother me a bit for someone to say, okay, Jeff, here's what needs done. Can you do this? Do you need help doing it? Or should we hand this task off to someone else? An open and candid discussion about the different tasks is exactly what needs to happen. And then once everybody has an idea, after a little while, you don't even need to talk about it. We understand, well, this task should fit this person best. And, that doesn't really hold true necessarily just for disabled folks. Some people's expertise may be verbal. So we would have them be, the front person to discuss with other people. Some people's abilities may be more physical and so on. So it's just an idea of having an open discussion about each individual on the team's abilities and how they can work together to get the goal done. Because, here again, in any business, failure is not an option. We want to work together and not compete with one another. We have enough competition out there in the world. We should work together on this side of it.
Okay, great. We have another question that I think maybe you all can answer. It says, has Uber been a help to the blind community?
I would say it has in areas where it's available.
I would have to agree with that, but here again, like Randy said, in West Virginia, because we're not quite as well developed as other states in that regard, you're not going to get a Uber driver outside of the metropolitan areas usually.
And where I live in New York City, Uber is everywhere, as well as public transportation, mass transportation. So the mix is very ideal in a large urban community.
Yeah. Okay, great. I've got another question. It is, I believe it was Tony who mentioned learning Braille. What was it like learning Braille, and are you able to use it at work or in your work?
Well, I like to make the joke that when I was around 35 years old, I saw the handwriting on the wall. And the problem was I was no longer seeing the handwriting on the wall. And that is why I learned Braille. So I learned Braille when I was 35 years old, which is much different than if you are taught as a child to learn Braille. I think if I had it to do over again, I would have had them make me learn Braille when I was 5 and 6 years old. I would then be much faster at it today than I am. So when you learn Braille later, you learn to use it well. You can use it in all sorts of circumstances. There are devices that have Braille that come on the device itself. It's called refreshable Braille. So you'll read a line of Braille and press a button and it'll put up the next line of Braille. And then there's the old-fashioned Braille, which is printed on paper. I use Braille for short notes. I use it to label things in the household. And I use it to label my files for work purposes. I do not use Braille for reading speeches or for reading long books or long texts because I'm just too slow at it. So for a slow Braille reader, Braille is still extremely effective. For a fast Braille reader, you can use it for a lot more things. For example, I've published 2 books, and before the pandemic, I was setting out to do book readings, and I had to have a different way of doing a book reading than reading off of a chunk of Braille paper because I just wasn't fast enough. Then the pandemic came in, and a lot of that in-person stuff stopped. But we're gonna go back to that. But I would not use Braille for something that would be of length. So for me, Braille was easy to learn. The sense of touch develops. You just have to practice. But I never got fast at it. But I use it every day for many, many things in life and work.
Great. Randy and Jeff, do you want to add anything?
I use Braille also, but I don't use it as much as I used to. Because of screen reader technology and my iPhone, and everything is so much more accessible now with voice. But I do read Braille and I do use Braille, but not as much as I did growing up.
As far as myself, I don't use Braille hardly at all. I learned a tiny little bit of it, but because I suffered most of my visual deficits past the age of 30, I never really tried to get that good at it. And I'm so thankful now that so much of the content that I need is available. For instance, YouTube has every book someone is narrating it. And so it makes it much, much easier just to go onto the internet and find the actual audio.
Yeah, and even people with sight use a lot of those audio books. I mean, they're very popular for everybody. Okay, great. There's another question, and it is, how do you and others approach safety as a person who is blind?
Safety. Well, just about every single thing you do, especially when you have poor eyesight or can't see at all, involves safety. It's very easy to bump into something or trip over something. So the first rule is everything we do carefully and with forethought. And then we have techniques that we've been taught. Things such as self-protective techniques, like put your hand in front of your face before you bend down, to use your cane if you need to use one, use your sense of hearing. You gather a lot of information that way. We even use our sense of smell, because if something doesn't smell the way it's supposed to, like the room that you just entered, you right away notice it and you stop. So use all your senses, use your techniques, but above all else, every time you do anything, do it with forethought and care.
I would say just
Go ahead, Randy.
I would say just take your time, be cautious of where you are, your surroundings. And I use my light perception a lot to let me know where I'm at as far as in the room. So I would just say, as far as my safety is concerned, I just try to take my time, cautious of my surroundings, use my light perception in my ears and my hands and feet, and take my time.
That's exactly right. As I mentioned before, in a complex production environment, and almost for anything, I've learned get there early before everyone else gets there. Check out the environment, try to build an internal map, a 3D model, that works really well for a complex production environment where I know where everything is and kind of pilot my way through it. Another thing I do, you can probably see from the video, I wear safety glasses almost everywhere I go. These are made by a company called Starlight. They cost about $2 a pair. And because I just have the one eye at 2200, I really want to take care of that because I do have a significant handicap. Like Anthony was saying, you can thrust your head into some dangerous places without realizing it. So the safety glasses are a great accommodation for that. And like Randy was saying, just take your time. Like I said, get there early and kind of what we call suss out the situation. That is, figure out where things are and so on. And then that way, all throughout the day or however long the production lasts, you have a good idea of your environment and what the hazards are in it. The biggest, most dangerous thing is being thrust into an environment without an opportunity to learn where the hazards are, where the step down is, where the step up is, and so on.
Okay, great. We have about 2 minutes left. I'm going to ask another question and maybe one of you can offer some insight on this. What services are most beneficial in assisting you in locating employment opportunities?
Well,
Any
word of
particular
mouth,
agency?
the online services are the two that I would offer up: word of mouth and the online services.
I would say word of mouth has been what's worked well for me.
Actually, yes, word of mouth is the thing. And, the biggest barrier is transportation. And, as I mentioned with the pandemic, that hasn't been as much of a problem because a lot of that stuff has stopped. But as things pick back up again, I'd say transportation will be a big issue. And, there's a lot more jobs we could do if we could just get there.
Okay, well, this wraps it up for today's Herd Insights Small Business webinar. We really appreciate all the learning we've gotten about people who are blind from today's webinar. A real special thanks to our guests and moderator, Dr. Ralph McKinney. This is our last event for the academic year. We will be continuing this webinar series over the summer. Look for your registration email for the next event to arrive in a few weeks. We appreciate your participation today, and always remember, we are Marshall.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.